Yeah, okay. We want to see if other people have questions. Senator Roth and Senator Witkowski.
And you use I think the length of time, 17 years or something as the average. And yeah. We heard Secretary Kelly, I thought he used 4 to 5 years, and I'm not sure that he said deliver a project. I think you used the word deliver a project, and I'm not sure exactly what that means, whether delivery means the start of construction or the notice of completion. But my question is, regardless of which it is, as a follow-on to the chair's question, why in the world would it take somewhere between 5 and 17 years to deliver a construction project?
The larger and more complex a project is, the longer it takes to deliver. And I think when you look at that time frame, we spend a significant amount of time in the environmental phase. So an average capacity improvement type project, and it doesn't matter whether it's a highway project or a transit project, usually takes at least 5 years just to get through the environmental process. So if you look at the sequential nature of what we call project delivery, if it takes at least 5 years to get through an environmental process, oftentimes it can take 5, 6, 7, 8 years or longer. So you have the environmental process, and then you finish environmental, and then you start a design process, which can take another 2 to 3 years, and then you acquire right-of-way, and then you go to construction. When you look at that process from start to finish, that time frame starts adding up. And so we need to look at ways to perform some of this work simultaneously, and that's what design build does. The design build process allows all of us to be under design while we're buying the right-of-way and while we're starting construction, so we can compress that time frame. Mm-hmm. On the 91 project, for example, we estimate that we shaved 3 years off of that project's duration by using design build. So it takes a long time to go through those processes, and we need to look at each one of those phases to identify ways to, when I use streamline, and people are uncomfortable with the conversation about streamlining because it implies that we're changing the rules or that we're bypassing rules, and that's not what I mean by streamlining. By streamlining, we just need to find ways to accelerate the process and minimize the amount of red tape that goes along with the reviews and approvals. It doesn't mean sidestep the regulations and the law. It just means finding ways to do it a little bit better.
Well, I guess we forget that at each stage of the process, there's an opportunity for those who are opposed to challenge the matter in court, which, depending on where you are in the state, can take up to 5 years to get through that. So I suppose that adds to the process.
It certainly does, and I would say that based on our experience in Riverside County, we now pretty much expect a CEQA lawsuit with every major project that we have that goes out the door. And again, it doesn't matter if it's a transit project or one that's been on the books for 20 years. We expect a CEQA lawsuit pretty much every time out the door, and so that's a real opportunity. I know there have been discussions about modernizing CEQA over the years in the legislature. I think it's time for that conversation again, in that there are processes within CEQA that allow abuse of the system to take place, and there's opportunity to be able to minimize the ability to abuse the system for non-environmental and community purposes. So modernization of CEQA is a huge opportunity.
Thank you, Mr.
Chair. I'd like to ask Mr. Kempton the same question because he was the head of the original Asset Sales Tax Authority and then worked in Orange County, so he might have an opinion on this issue. So streamlining projects, how do we install that? And also Director of Caltrans, how do we install that confident in the efficiency of our delivery organizations? And what do we need to do?
I would say, first of all, supporting what Ann said is that I think procurement is a huge issue in terms of the time that it takes to do business. And as she outlined, the process is sequential, typical process, design, bid, build type of a process. And that we can look for more innovative ways to actually get projects underway. Design build is one of them. Construction management, general contractor is another. There are ways to do business that make the process go faster. I think environmental is a huge impediment to fast project delivery. And so we have to be careful here because nobody is talking about removing environmental protections. It's just the process can be made to work much more smoothly, and that is a huge impact. Litigation does take its toll, and we are seeing more and more litigation. People don't necessarily use the courts to challenge the project as much as to slow it down. And that is very problematic. And I think that we in the way we approach business, we get set in certain ways of doing business, and so innovation tends to suffer. That's one of the benefits, I think, of the public-private partnerships, because they bring private sector innovation to the game, and that's something that we get on the public side. I think we get sometimes more focused on just doing business the way it's always been done. It's safe, it works, but I think the innovation tends to suffer with that kind of a focus. And so I think those are 4 areas where I would say that we can do better and make things go faster.
And how about Jim? Do you have comments?
Yeah, I do, and I appreciate that.
We're asking this because we're talking about finance, but I think if we're going to, my own feeling is if we're going to go to the voters and we're going to tell them we're going to do something, we got to have an underlying confidence in the ability to deliver things. And I think that's so important in terms of my experience as chair of the traffic authority with my chief executive officer, Will Kempton, in Santa Clara County, delivering those highway projects. We had to have the confidence to finish the projects on time and on budget, and we had to work very hard to make that happen. It was very hard. We had to work very hard to do that. And I know the hard work that you have to do to deliver those projects, both of you. And I want to hear what Jim has to say here.
Well, yeah, I appreciate that. I'm going to put on my other hat as a CTC commissioner to help answer that question, because if you add up the things that Ann Mayer and Will Kempton have discussed, it really fundamentally answers the question that Senator Cannella had earlier today about why we don't get more out of our gas tax dollar project-wise, because it's no coincidence that the other state that is right up there with us in the terms of what we're spending on gas tax is New York, which is urbanized, heavily regulated, and basically in the same box as we are. I have overseen, as well as all the other commissioners, just a good example, the improvement of I-5, which was part of the Prop 1B package of projects. You're talking about a project right through the middle of Los Angeles. The right-of-way acquisition of that project is mind-boggling, from the number of properties and the cost of those properties, the legal, the litigiousness of it all, and the environmental. And by environmental, we have to basically conform to NEPA and CEQA for most of our, for most of these projects. You have to, there's big habitat costs, stormwater runoff costs. And Caltrans doesn't really add, we did a little study offline of Caltrans, how they tabulate this stuff. And I would tabulate it differently. If you really looked at the true cost of meeting environmental obligations, it's much higher than what you're going to see because of just the way they tabulate things in their database. The cost of the environmental component of a project from a time and a cost standpoint is substantial. And I'm not saying that I think I agree with Will. It's not that we are trying to get out from under environmental responsibility. Nobody wants to do that. But is there a better way to do what we're doing? You better believe it.
Thank you. Thank you. Bob?
Yes.
Senator Murkowski.
I guess my question is on these best practices. I mean, we know if we look at environmental report, in my area in southern Alameda County, we have an EIR for the Warm Springs extension, an EIR for Berryessa extension, and another EIR for the downtown San Jose. So, and now it looks like it's deja vu all over again with high-speed rail. Instead of just doing one environmental document and saying this is what's going to be studied, you set yourself up for 3 lawsuits instead of 1. So that's a best practice. I'm not in your culture. I'm up here. I'm down there. So that's one observation. I guess I'll ask you to comment. And the other is when you're talking about construction management, I mean, I remember back in Alameda County, we segmented the improvements of Interstate 580. So instead of having one construction contractor, which had to get a bond that only one construction firm could qualify, we broke it up into 6 segments. So there were 3 on the west side of the freeway and 3 on the east side of the freeway. And all of a sudden we had competition. That was, when that came before our commission, I thought, how idiotic that we were never always doing this. And then going forward, when we have limited funds and we're all here at the trough trying to figure out how we get the money, why that's not the culture of the transportation community throughout the state. And I guess, assure me that it is, I guess is my question.
I would comment, Senator, that it is getting better. Certainly, if you look at Caltrans, and I spent 5 years as the director, and Caltrans is making strides in that direction. You wouldn't have talked about anything but design, bid, build as a process years ago. Now the Caltrans director has been one of the chief spokespersons for the CMGC process, which can take time off of the delivery process. Caltrans has been supportive of design build. The legislature has given the department the authority to work in this area and to try these processes out. And they've been, for the most part, I think, successful. So I think the department is certainly open to innovative ideas and doing things better. But there are so many regulations and requirements. One of my good friends, Gary Gallegos from the San Diego Association of Governments, likes to say that, for example, the federal government provides maybe 20% of the funding here in California, and yet 80% of the rules that we have to go through in terms of delivering projects and getting work done is set by the federal government. Not to dump the blame on the federal government, but it makes a point. We really do have to work at this and continue to practice innovation and have the flexibility and be, I always like to say, the old Caltrans, you didn't advance by being innovative, you advanced by going by the book. And so the new Caltrans, I think, is much more creative. People are encouraged to be innovative. And I think over the long haul, that's going to be beneficial.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
And I certainly think the incentive for innovation is really taking hold across the state. Let me give you an example of something that we experienced in Riverside County. I guess it's been almost 10 years ago. There was a method called design sequencing, which is kind of a precursor California version of design build. And we tried it on a very large project in Riverside County. At the time, it was the 2nd largest project in the state, only behind the Bay Bridge. So it was a very large project, an untested method. It did not go perfectly by any stretch of the imagination. It was a really difficult project. But the RCTC board acknowledged that risk going in. They said, we know this is new, we know it's innovative, and we're willing to try. And what we need to make sure is that we manage the project as best we can and we learn from the lessons of the project. So there were no consequences of innovation or no repercussions for the innovation. We learned from that process, and the project did get opened in an accelerated fashion, so we did achieve one outcome. The challenge is that that's not always the case. That's a good example. But innovation, if it goes south, there can often be repercussions for an agency for failure. Well, why did you do it that way? So then there becomes an institutional aversion to risk of not wanting to do something differently, because if it fails, they'll be blamed for the failure. So I think that's also got to be part of the conversation, is where there is innovation and where you are on the leading edge, cutting edge, sometimes it doesn't always work well. So I think that can be not only, you know, the culture, and I'm an engineer, so I guess I can say engineers like to follow rules. So there's a natural aversion to doing something differently, but I think we've also have to create an environment where innovation is a good thing.
One more question on the self-help counties, because, and Mr. Earp, our Commissioner Earp, I appreciate your omnibus transportation tax concept that you gave to us and looking at these different measures. We've got some cap and trade funds. There's going to be a discussion on how we use the increased amount in excess of $2 billion. Should we be looking to the self-help counties who are already taxing themselves for transportation improvements as a model for other counties to help themselves, and also because of the transparency and the expenditure, the time that they put in on their expenditure plans, which clearly shows the public that confidence that we're looking for, that these have been thought out and this is coming to a city near you, or
right. Absolutely. I think the self-help model translates very well into any discussion about revenues and how those revenues would be expended. We have seen it time and time again by the fact that voters keep renewing sales tax measures in counties where we have them. And then if you also look at the polling, not only the polling that the professor did, but also the focus groups, people are willing to tax themselves or to pay a fee when they know their money will be spent well and on things that benefit them. And I think that model has been proven over and over again, and at a statewide level with Proposition 1B bond that went forward to the voters in 2006. And we talk about promises made, promises kept all of the time, but it's true. It matters, it resonates. And so I think the self-help model translates very well.
Okay, other questions, members? Okay, thank you, panelists. We'll ask for the public input at this time. Are there any speakers that would like to address our committee? Please come forward, please. Go ahead. Please, welcome.
Good afternoon. Bill Higgins with the California Association of Councils of Governments, and we represent a lot of the regional transportation planning agencies like RCTC that you heard from today, but also all 18 metropolitan planning organizations that have SB 375 responsibility, and ACTC, although I see he's gone, so, and the VTA now has joined CalCog as well. I just wanted to make a couple points that echoed a few of the panelists here today. First of all, I think it's a state and a local problem. That's one of the lessons I pulled from today. The road infrastructure issue is, there's a state issue, the way the governor framed it. But as Jennifer Whiting from the League framed it, it's also a local and regional issue, and the fix has to address both of them together because people drive through both systems, and they don't think that, oh, I'm suddenly on the state system. They're driving to work or to their school, and it's one system to them. And they expect, I think, the state for all of us to work together. The second thing I think that I'll just leave you with is as we move, as the entities that are thinking about SB 375 and greenhouse gas and multiple modes of transportation, roads serve more than just motorists. It's pedestrians, it's cyclists, it's freight, it's transit. Those roads are serving all those different uses in a safe manner. And so this is not just a motorist issue, it's a California issue. And we're pleased to be engaged in this conversation and very happy that you've highlighted this issue and willing to roll up our sleeves and work with you to find a solution.
Thank you very much. Please.
Thank you, Keith Dunn. I get to wear several hats. I'm here today for the American Council of Engineering Companies, but I'm also the Executive Director of the Self-Help County. So we really are grateful for this hearing and for your leadership on this issue. As you've heard, there are many options that are out there on the table. I know from the private sector, from ACEC's perspective, they're very invested in making sure that all those opportunities are looked at and tested. And looking from the self-help model, you know, we've got 20 counties who successfully have delivered these projects based on those expenditure plans, which is really a contract with the voters. I think it's a great model to look at. I know that the private sector engineering firms are excited to partner with you and work together to find some funding solutions. And it's like Mr. Arp said, it's going to be a blend of several things, very likely. It's going to take some political courage, but we're prepared to stand with you and applaud your efforts. And thank you for this hearing today.
Do we have any other comments? In that case, these two committees are adjourned.